Okay, so for this video we are going to be doing an integers review. Just to review what an integer is, we have positive or negative whole numbers. And we're going to go over representing words with integers, so what words can mean what different type of integer, positive or negative. We're going to talk about absolute value, which is just the distance from 0, and reminding you that this is always positive. And then we're going to talk a little bit about comparing integers using inequality symbols. So remember that inequality symbols are the less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Okay, but to start off, we're going to talk about integers and representing those words with integers. So for positive integers, we have words like deposit, increase, up, ascend means to go up, above, added, raise. So when we see these in word problems, most of the time they're going to be representing adding money into a bank, which is a deposit, or something was increasing in height or temperature, ascending, so like climbing up a mountain or going up in the water, above sea level, above average, or adding or raising something. And then for negatives, we have a withdrawal, which means I'm taking money out of the bank. A decrease, which means it's going down, descending, going down a mountain, going down in the water, below sea level, and those kinds of things. So when we see these, the most common mistakes that people make when they're first learning this is the difference between a deposit and a withdrawal. So deposit is a positive thing because we're putting money into our account, so that makes us happy. A withdrawal is taking money out of our account, that makes us not so happy, so that's negative. So our example for that is Alex had $30 in his bank account, and then he withdrew $46. How much money was in his account after the withdrawal? So first thing, we're going to pull out our important information. So we're going to kind of highlight here. So he had $30 in his bank, and then he withdrew, so that's just another form of that word withdraw. So we already saw that withdraw is a negative, so we're going to write that this is a negative for us. So he withdrew $46, and now we want to know how much was in there after the withdrawal. So that's what we're looking for in the end. So now that we know this information, that we started with $30, and then we took away $46, we can write our number sentence. So we've got 30 minus 46. And some of us are still visualizing this on a number line, which is totally okay. For some of us, we still need that reference. So we can draw that we started at $30 and then we went down $46, and then we can skip count or jump count to figure out where we would end. Of course, this 46 is bigger than 30, so that would land us on the opposite side of where 0 is. Or we can follow our integer rules. Okay, so we have a subtraction problem, and we can rewrite this as an addition problem. So going down by $46 is the same thing as when we add a negative. So when we do that, it's the same sentence, it just looks a little bit different. We're writing it in an opposite way. So we're adding the negative instead of subtracting a positive. So these two statements are the same thing, whichever one helps you visualize it better. So we know that to get down to 0, we have to take away 30. And then whatever is left over is how far we are on the negative side. So we can use our additive inverse there. So to get to 0, we would have to subtract 30. When we subtract 30, we have 16 left over. So that tells us that we're going to end at negative 16 on the number line. So we can use our additive inverse. Remember, an additive inverse is what's going to make it get to 0. So we had 30. To get to 0, we had to take away 30. And then we had 16 left over, so that means we are 16 spaces on the negative side. So he's actually in a bad situation because he has owed the bank $16 now. The next thing that we're going to go over is our absolute value. So remember, this is distance from 0. The biggest thing that when we're going over this we need to remember is that absolute value does not mean the opposite. Okay, it means the distance, the number of spaces away from 0 on the number line. So if they're telling us the absolute value, which is what these straight up and down markers mean, the absolute value of -9, -9 is 9 spaces away from 0. And that's our final answer, 9 spaces from 0. And then what is the absolute value of 8? Again, it does not mean the opposite, so some people just automatically put the opposite sign there and leave it, but we're still looking at how many spaces away from 0 it is, so 8 is 8 spaces away from 0. The next problem, we have a little bit of a different looking problem here. We have 3 minus 10, and then we're taking the absolute value of that. So remember that absolute value symbols are kind of like parentheses or groupings. We're going to do what's inside of them first, and then whenever we're done, we're going to take the absolute value of that. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out what is 3 take away 10, and then when we do finish that, we're going to go ahead and take the absolute value of it. So when we have 3 take away 10, obviously this take away 10 is bigger than that 3, so that tells me that's going to be a negative answer. So I'm going to go ahead and put my negative sign there. And then again, we can use our additive inverse, saying that we're starting at 3. So to get to 0, we would have to take 3 away. And then whatever's left over is how far negative we are. So 10 minus those 3 spaces means that we have -7 left over. So now we're going to go ahead and take the absolute value of that -7. And -7 is 7 spaces from 0, so our final answer is 7. The last thing that we're going to go over is using inequality symbols to make the following statements true. So we're going to use those symbols less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to make these statements true. So the first thing we're going to consider here is we're going to look to see if they have positive or negative signs. So we have a -3.5 and a +4. If we're dealing with positives and negatives, the negative is always going to be less. It's on the other side of 0. So in this case, the 4 would be greater. So -3.5 is less than 4. Here we are dealing with 2 negatives, so we're going to have to look at which one is closer to 0. So on a number line, if I'm looking at whatever is closer to 0, the -2.4 would be closer to 0 than the -4.6. So because of that, we know that the -2.4 is greater. The next one, for number 3, we have an absolute value symbol here. So we're going to take the absolute value of -5, which would give us 5. So now we're comparing 5 and -5. The positive is going to be greater. The next one, again, we're comparing two negatives. So if we were on a number line, and we have 0, we have -7, and then -10. The -7 is closer to 0, so that would be a greater number. So those are most of the things to go over with integers: what words represent those positives and negatives, how to write the number sentence. You can use your additive inverse to figure out what would be left over. Absolute values, distance from 0, and then using our inequality symbols to make these statements true, comparing those integers.